You are listening to the IFH Podcast Network. For more amazing filmmaking and screenwriting podcasts, just go to ifhpodcastnetwork.com.
Welcome to the Successful Screenwriter Podcast, where we discuss anything and everything screenwriting. Here we interview successful screenwriters and filmmakers to find out just what it takes to make it in the industry. Welcome to the podcast. We have on an awesome guest today, actor, writer, producer, Alvin Cowan. Alvin, thanks for being on with us.
Hey, Jeff, thanks for having me, man.
Oh, no, I'm excited. So what's going to be really cool today is I've been trying to find a podcast writer that we can talk about, kind of break this whole thing down, figure it out, because I know this is a new field people are getting into. There are dramas that are getting optioned now and turned into shows, being turned into features. So I think writing a drama podcast can be a really good option for a screenwriter, and I like to present that to our community. And you're the guy, so
yeah.
I'm really excited about this.
I'm the guy.
You're the guy.
Great. Me too,
all right,
man.
So you kind of developed and helped write a show that's very popular right now called American Coyote.
That's right.
Which is a fascinating tale. And before we kind of get into this and how you found the story and how you helped develop it, produce it, write and all that stuff, before we really dive into that, could you just give us a little bit of your origin story that kind of brought you to that point?
Sure. There's a lot there, but I'll start with kind of my journey in Hollywood, which really started as an actor.
Okay.
I moved to LA for a girl. We dated about 2 weeks and we broke up, and then you're in LA once. So if you're in LA once, you got to be an actor, right?
Yep.
So I did that for a number of years before I realized that I needed to start developing some of my own content. And so that's really where I started writing, probably about 5 or 6 years into my acting experience. And as a screenwriter or as a writer in general, I highly recommend the acting experience, as I think that writing dialogue is that an actor can actually say is one of my strengths as a result of that experience. So and I wrote a number of things that were really bad, and I just kind of kept writing, and eventually some things got pretty good, and I ended up with an agency that was kind of dually representing me as both an actor and a writer off of a couple of bookings. And my agent just happened to have some experience in the lit program and his background at some of the bigger agencies. And so he saw an opportunity, to kind of push some of the projects that I had in development at the time down the field for me. And one of those was really Coyote. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean,
you just elevator pitch version of it.
No, that's great. It's fine. I appreciate it. So you just said something, and I want to touch on that just for a moment. Because you said, I did some bad writing. Well, of course, right? Mm-hmm. Anybody who's writing does bad writing, but bad writing is writing. And that is the important thing. So you can get down on yourself that, oh, this is garbage, this is crap, but you're doing it, you're practicing it, and eventually bad writing becomes good writing, right? So
that's right.
Let's talk about American Coyote. Give me the rundown of the show, the central character, how you've kind of found out about it, how you've developed it, all that stuff.
Sure. Yeah, it actually sourced from a screenplay that I was writing, one that was not bad, but not great either.
It was the okay screenplay.
It was the okay screenplay. That's right. And very much kind of towards the mid to late part of my 10,000 hours of, practice that it requires to become good at something. So, and it was just kind of an original concept. I had seen the movie Sicario. I'm a big fan of Taylor Sheridan's stuff. I come from Texas, and so his stuff, his worlds resonate for me.
It's
and
visceral. I mean, it is visceral.
Yeah.
I mean, you feel like you're in, you don't feel like you're in a fantasy world. It feels like a different world, but it feels real. Like, I don't know
Yeah.
who's living that life. It's wild, but yeah, I get
Yeah.
it.
There's an authenticity to his stuff
Yeah.
that only comes from having lived it, or having lived in those places, or experienced those
Yeah.
environments, that I think really shines through in his work. And anyway, I was all fired up on Sicario and writing a border feature that was not quite as good as Sicario, but and I did some research. I was
Yeah.
doing, looking at stuff, and I came across this article in GQ magazine that had run, I don't know, 10 years ago, Jeff.
Okay.
And I read it, and it was about Elden Kidd, who eventually became the central character of the podcast. But
Right.
and his story in a 3,000 word GQ feature piece. And I looked up Elden, and I shot him an email, and it just so happened that he lived in Riverside. And he said, "Why don't you come down for lunch?" And so I said, "All right." And so I drove to Riverside, and I met Elden at his house, which was an interesting environment itself.
He sounds like, the way they describe him, I mean, he sounds like a larger than life kind of guy. Is he just like that personality? Okay.
Very, very, very much so. Extremely charismatic. And he's kind of a big dude,
Yeah,
he's just
right.
kind of, and yet this sweet kind of charismatic soul inside of him. He now has, as ever, he's always kind of up to different ventures. I think when I drove to meet him, one of the first things he said to me was could I interest you in a trailer for the movies? And so he's always kind of got a hustle, he's always hustling. And so he had a trailer that he was trying to flip and rent out for, movie productions, which is kind of standard Elden, as I came to find out. But we had lunch, and he ultimately said, I said, "Hey, I'm interested in potentially adapting your story for TV or film." And he said, by the end of lunch, he had told me a couple of stories that some of which ended up on the podcast, some of which didn't.
Right.
And all amazing. And he kind of had me hook, line, and sinker. And I think he eventually decided that he liked me enough to want me to tell his story.
Right.
And so we kind of concluded on a handshake, and then I went back and put a little paperwork together. And so that was the initial meeting that kind of where I optioned his life right.
So was there competition? I mean, this guy's story is so unique. Was there competition from other parties that were interested in getting his life rights? Did he turn people down?
Well, yes and no. I through the course of the development process, there were a number of other parties that were kind of would reach out to him occasionally, especially through Tim, his kind of literal partner in crime.
That's right. Yeah, Tim.
Yeah. So occasionally Tim would bring somebody who had reached out to Tim and wanted to do something.
Yeah.
But in general, no. At least initially, I had called ICM, the agent for the writer of the GQ article. I called her and said, "Hey, look, I've optioned this." I initially I was thinking about optioning the article itself, not that became a mess because I had to go through ICM and they weren't sure who I was, and ultimately you figured out that you didn't need the article, you needed Elden's life, and that there was no hurdle there necessarily to getting Elden's life other than, or the rights to his life story other than Elden himself, so to speak. And so that was kind of the way around the hoopla of dealing with big agencies or dealing with people finding out that you're after this story, if you will. So I think we kind of snuck under the radar in that regard.
Nice. Well, you put the legwork in, I mean, you did it. You hustled for it. You got it. I mean, that's what it takes in this industry. You can't just kind of sit around and send out an email and think that's enough. You've got to work for it. And you have, which is fantastic and almost like providence, because you're able just to like go down there and have lunch. It's so cool. So
I'll tell you, I'll piggyback on that just a little bit, in that I won't mention his name just because I'm an anti name drop guy, but I met with a big producer in Hollywood, a guy that's very well thought of, and one of the pieces when I was telling him that I was kind of at my wit's end about acting, and wasn't really getting a lot of auditions, and what should I do, and they kind of took a general meeting with me to kind of advise me as a mentor. And
that's nice.
One of the things that he said to me was the way he got his start was he went to Barnes and Noble, and he would just spend days at Barnes and Noble looking at books, and he eventually, through the course of putting in that legwork, found a number of different books that he was able to get the options to.
Nice.
Including, I think, up to about 50 books. And he basically said that, only one or two of those ended up turning into option rights on a film.
Right.
But the books themselves kind of started his development career, such that he had something to bring to the table, when he met with writers or when he met with directors or something. He had stories to use. And I think that's what really inspired the reach out to Elden was, hey, I've got to find my rights. I've got to find the different stories that I can kind of put under my umbrella, so that, if I find out that somebody's looking for this, that I'm able to kind of deliver on different genres.
Yeah, I mean, you're building like a portfolio, and I think it's a brilliant advice to go to Barnes and Noble, or if libraries still exist in the future, that'd be a great resource too. So who knows?
For sure.
So, no, I think that's fantastic advice. So when it comes down to kind of breaking down this story, so I mean, paying attention to your episodes, I was listening and trying to figure out the structure of it, because this is an interesting new kind of field to go into, and I might want to play around with it. So I'm trying to break it down. And so I noticed structure wise, you would end in a cliffhanger. Brilliant. So hook them for the next episode, right? But it's also, it's a limited series, right? So that's only tell, now that's all deliberate.
Yeah. So I partnered with a buddy of mine, actually from high school, who had done a podcast series prior to that, and he was after we kind of worked out the legal part of that, we took it and we sold it. And so we had the funding to kind of do the production of it under his production banner, and so he was kind of the mentor-ish of structure and of style, and they had a brand that was kind of part of this American crime series, if you will. And so each season, very very much like Serial or something, each season was kind of one subject matter, and
like an anthology.
Yeah, like an anthology, exactly. And the first season of that was called American Skyjacker, and it was about this guy who hijacked an airplane. Also a very good series. And Elden's story kind of fit right nichely into the second season of that kind of American crime series.
Okay.
And regarding structure, it's interesting because you obviously do your outlines, but it becomes a bit of a jigsaw puzzle in terms of putting it together, because you create your outlines, but then you go get your interviews, and what your interviews set, the two pieces of advice that I really took home about the actual writing of the episodes were let the character, or let the dialogue say the story as much as you possibly can, so you're not in there with a narrator all the time.
Right.
People want to hear the voice of the characters, and as you astutely pointed out, always end on a cliffhanger, so that it's kind of a drug that people have to keep coming back for. And so we start with these outlines, and then you go into production and you record, your different interviews, and you find, hey, these things fit here, and you kind of have to rejigger your outlines accordingly. Right. But we knew,
and then follow down any kind of rabbit holes that the interviewee goes through.
Yeah, there were a couple of things that were cut out of different episodes of the plot lines, including a rabbit hole that we went down around the Mormons and the Mayans, and there's a crossover there in terms of bloodlines, and we were kind of trying to connect that, but that was kind of an interesting kind of maybe a motivation for a bloodline DNA motivation for why Elden felt such kinship to the people that he was crossing. So yeah, you become an investigative reporter really, and a little bit less of a writer, putting together a doc style series really. And really narration is used to connect those quotes in a through line that makes sense, right? So
yeah,
it's more documentary style than I would say dramatic screenwriting. And I do think, there are a lot of people, including myself, who are trying to figure out the scripted versions of podcasts, and I don't know that people have really figured that out yet. But the one thing I have figured out around that is that it requires an audio hook, which means there's got to be a unique reason why you're able to listen to these people in a scripted way.
Right. What's grabbing them? Yeah.
Yeah. So I've heard about one that is being developed right now, where it's about a coup, and there's a mole within the presidential office of the coup.
Yeah.
And so, you're able, and that person's wearing a wire. So that's an example of kind of like an audio hook of how you might do it scripted wise. And I think people are having a lot harder time developing scripted content and more taking what we did, which is doc style content for audio, and then adapting that to scripted, right? Because I think that's, from a business angle as a screenwriter, that's where your payoff really is in this kind of work. And I see this as, just speaking business perspective,
absolutely,
the way the productions look at this, or the way the production companies are looking at this, is as funded development. And if you think about it that way,
that's brilliant.
It costs them, I don't know, $120,000 to develop an entire 10 episode podcast, right? And they get writers, WGA writers writing for them.
Mm-hmm.
They own that content with some derivative plays, right? So, we're involved in those derivatives in the sense that we have a little bit of ownership if it becomes a feature, if it becomes a television series, or if it becomes a doc feature, if it becomes a doc series.
Right.
You have some ownership in that, but for them, they maintain the majority of that ownership, right? So as opposed to paying a screenwriter multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars to write a script for them that they don't know whether they're able to get funding for it, they can pay $100,000, have a product that they can sell the ad time for, make money on that product, and then also make money on the derivative of that product. So
no, I think you're 100% right, because personally, my view of where the future is in the industry is adapting these podcasts into features, and whether action, dramatic, or what. Because the way I look at it, we've already done this. So if you look at the past 20 years, they've been adapting every comic book or graphic novel out there, right? And they've been changing and turning into every, from little known characters to the Avengers are all getting adapted into material. Well, I mean, I think that's going to bleed dry soon. And I think you're going to see like a new golden age where they're going to be adapting these original, unique, and already developed franchises into these big films. I think that's where it's going.
I 100% agree. I mean, I'm very bullish on podcasts, but and part of that might be because I'm in it, but
Yeah.
I mean, just from a pure, producerial standpoint, you can test run an idea at a lower cost to find out whether there's an audience, and then if there
Right.
is an audience, you can sell that audience to the studio or the production company,
Absolutely,
in order to get the funding that you need. So I think our podcast had 1 million downloads in January, right?
amazing.
And you look at that, and I walk into a pitch meeting with a feature idea with a podcast IP behind it that has 1 million downloads, and an executive says, okay, like, that's not as much of a gamble for me as it would be for me to buy this spec screenplay and put that, out on
No,
the market.
they love a sure bet. There's no question. I mean, that's why you have so many actors out there trying to be influencers as well, right? Because they're not just selling themselves, they're selling potential viewers. And so it all makes sense. I mean, this is the reality of where we're at right now. Do you have to have followers? No, but it doesn't hurt, right?
Right, exactly.
So nitty gritty wise, because I love this producerial aspect that you bring to this knowledge. Nitty gritty wise, I've written some docs. So when you write a doc, it's a whole different type of process than writing a regular screenplay, because you're including, I mean, with a doc, you include visuals, but you also include sounds and special effects, which is something that I'm assuming you're working into the script, but I'm guessing that it's not the standard 1 page a minute type of thing with writing a podcast, whether it's a doc or drama.
To be very specific, and I learned this process again from my mentor buddy who kind of helped me out. But the way ours were structured, where we essentially created 2 columns on a piece of paper.
Yep.
And it was an AV format, right? And so, on the left-hand side of that column was what it was. It was either the narrator speaking, it was either a soundbite quote that we had a time code associated with, so that the audio engineer could pull that quote, or an SFX piece or an audio cue. And so each box of each column kind of corresponded going down the page, if you will. So narrator starts and brings you into the intro. Then we have the sound up of whatever special effects we're running, and then it's music cue for the opening credit music sequence, and then it's pull quote from Elden, and so you're just kind of filling in these boxes all the way down, and then obviously you have your outline on the next to you.
So it's exactly how you do a documentary then, because that's exactly how I do it. I have 3 columns of audio, visual, narrative, and then you can have a 4th for special effects if you want, but it depends on how extra you want to be. But so no, it's cool to see that that's how you did it. And so then you kind of outlined it. You had a direction you wanted to go, and then you went and you interviewed your subject, and then adapted as necessary, and then kind of built that long narrative. Did you find yourself kind of subconsciously having to create like an act 1, an act 2, and an act 3 type of a deal when you were kind of structuring each episode?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly how we structured it. And with a cliffhanger at the end of act 1, a cliffhanger at the end of act 2 to keep you coming back, and then the best cliffhanger we could at the end of act 3 to keep you listening. You
had some good ones. You had some good ones. There's one where Tim almost gets arrested at the board. I was like, oh, they got me. They got me under. Now I want to know what happens. No, that's solid stuff, man.
This podcast is brought to you by TheSuccessfulScreenwriter.com, where you can find instructional books, videos, courses, and screenplays of Hollywood's biggest hits to download. As an added bonus, visit www.TheSuccessfulScreenwriter.com to download The Guide for Every Screenwriter for free. Yes, free. Available exclusively at TheSuccessfulScreenwriter.com. Now, back to our show.
Yeah, I got to stick around. I guess I'll keep driving around.
That's right. And I actually got a lot of flack from friends and family that we didn't release it entirely as a whole, because people
Oh,
were
you
kind
kept
of,
them on the hook.
yeah. So
Awesome.
I can't speak to that strategy other than I think that's what that production studio likes to do.
It's
But
successful. It's tried and true. Why wouldn't you do it? You know.
right.
Um. All right. So you're doing a more docudrama style, which is
Yeah.
working, and you believe that a docudrama style is a little bit better because you get the words out of their mouth instead of trying to do kind of the old school radio drama where you have professional actors coming in voice acting and then trying to kind of force the narrative that way. God, that is a really good point because it's almost like an evolution of that style, I'd say, because back then they didn't really do that. Now I mean, it was almost very characterized back then. Now you can really hear the voice and feel the tone and the emotional impact that that Eldon was going through, or Tim was going through. Like, you could hear Tim, he sounds freaked out when he's talking about some of the stuff. So you're like, yeah, okay, it feels real. No, I think that's
Yeah.
cool. Do you have any kind of any advice or any tips for any other writers that are looking to get into this type of field?
Yeah. The the first thing to know, I think, is there's plenty of opportunity. Everybody and their dog in Hollywood is popping up with an audio division of their particular company. So there's a lot of need for this style of content. iHeart and Spotify and all of those places are just dying. The outlets are dying for that type of content because they know that they get cut in on that derivative play when it goes to Netflix too. So
Right.
it's an alternative revenue stream for them as well. So there's a lot of opportunity, at least right now, because there's a lot of new shops popping up that want to produce this style of content. And I do kind of piggybacking on your point earlier, think that the hot genre obviously is true crime, but I think that as long as you have something that's that you found that you can verify, so to speak, that's a true story, I think there's
Right.
Plenty of opportunity in different genres. And honestly, somebody is going to crack the scripted version of it. I know of one shop in town that is looking at old scripts that didn't get made and trying to figure out how to turn those into podcasts.
Yeah.
So there's plenty of opportunity out there. And I think that as a writer, the best thing that you can do is to bring some kind of piece of IP to the table, some
That's
kind of
good.
original idea
With an
that has
audience.
an angle. Yeah. I mean, and I mean, I've even, I hope I'm not giving away too many of my secrets, but I have, I kid, I don't care. I've gone on to Upwork and solicited, random writers from all over the world, all over the country, to try to find if anybody has an original story from their family, from their past, their personal life, their friends' personal life,
Right.
Anything that can be verified as true. And I would also offer that just because there was a 60 minutes, 15-minute piece on some subject matter doesn't mean that it's been fully explored, a la Eldon. That
Right.
GQ piece, it was great, but when I spoke to Eldon, I realized he's got 100 stories that were cut out of that piece, right? And so that doesn't prohibit me, and in fact, we were able to to some degree use that GQ piece as a marketing piece. I mean, it was in the public domain. So when you're talking to people about it, you can just send them to an article that they can read in 10 minutes, and they get the general idea of what it is. And then you say, and oh, by the way, this and this and this and this were not in that piece, and that's why this needs further exploration. So I would encourage people, I guess, to really relook at some things that maybe have been reported on or maybe have been told, but not at the depth that they maybe deserve.
I think that's a fantastic advice, but I would also wonder when you're looking at a true life story that has had coverage, you're gonna want to consider what kind of outreach it's going to get, right? I mean, how much can you sympathize with the character or the person? How much can you empathize with them? I mean, how much of a human condition about this story is universal that can pull in an audience? I mean, when I look at Elden Kidd, this is a guy who is saving and helping kids and reuniting families across the border illegally for years. I mean, that casts a wide net. So I'm assuming as you're looking for these things, you're looking for those stories that like anybody can get behind.
Yeah, I mean, not everybody's behind Elden. I assure you, we've gotten
fair point. I'll give that to you.
We've gotten some interesting opinions. Everybody. I mean, with a country that's obviously politically polarized, I think that our job as the writer was not to take a side,
right?
To report the story as we saw it, and not to try to influence or we've been accused of peddling a narrative, but I don't know that was our intention, or at least consciously. We just felt like it was our job to present Elden warts and all, and if I say often that Elden is nothing if not gray. He does not live in a black and white world, and he is nothing if not gray. So it's hard to really draw a black or white conclusion, and I think that's what a lot of people want about him. But I think that's what makes for great storytelling, especially in this true crime genre, where you're dealing with people who usually have broken the law, usually have some hair on them, so to speak. And so I think that's kind of in that particular genre of podcasting, in that particular genre of storytelling, I think that's what you're looking for is, that gray place where there's some empathy. I think Elden's family brought a lot of empathy. I think his experience as a father brought a lot of empathy.
Yeah, I think the conditions that kids were going through under coyotes that were less than safe or kind is another. But on top of your point, we're just building on top of each other now at this point. on top of your point, I would say it's still a story that casts a large net. Whether you're pro or not, you're still hitting the audience, whether they're listening to it and totally disagreeing or listening to it and totally sympathizing. I think you have achieved that goal. And yeah, the gray area is a great area to be around, because then it morally things get murky, which drives up conflict, which drives up interest, which drives up emotional response in your audience.
Well, I think that yes, I agree with that, but I also think that one of the great, and I don't mean to be tooting our horn, but this is.
I brought you on the show because the show's terrible. I definitely don't want you to say how great the show is.
I don't mean to be necessarily bragging about it, but I think one of the things that did well regarding Elden was when you take these macro concepts, right, and you take immigration, for instance, and people see it all in the news, and they see the kids, sleeping in tents or cages, and you see these caravans, and you see all these people who are clearly suffering, right? But you take that macro concept and you bring it down to a personal level where it's the story of one individual, and Elden is that, everybody knows what a coyote is, and people generally, I think, have ideas of what that lifestyle might be. But those are all stereotypical in some ways, and they're kind of generalizations, and I think stereotypes and generalizations come from truths in a lot of cases, but in Elden's case, he's an enigma in that way. So not only does he not fit the stereotype, but he's an individual that you can focus in on telling a story about from a macro concept that everybody generally thinks they know. And that to me I think, at least for me, what resonated, and I think to the extent that it resonated with an audience was, hey, I hear about immigration every single day. I hear about what's going on at the border every single day, but this took it down to the level of one individual and showed me what the day-to-day life was like for him, you know?
Well, I mean, American Coyote is brilliant storytelling. I enjoyed the show. I was like, well, okay, we got to bring this guy on. It's really good. And obviously with the millions of downloads you're getting, it's successful. And I wish you the best of success. And so where can our audience, our listeners, where can they find you at on social?
Sure. I'm probably most active on Instagram. I'm AE Cowan 10, so that's AECOWAN 10.
Okay.
And that's kind of my hub. I kind of, you'll see me dancing on there. You'll see my kids, but that's where I also promote some work, and that's probably where I'm most active.
Oh, very good. We're on Insta as well. So we're the Successful Screenwriter on Insta. So we'll make sure to give you a follow, and we will put that social media detail inside the description of this episode. Alvin, I just really wanted to thank you for coming on and just dropping some brilliant truth bombs on writing a docudrama for a podcast.
Sure, Jeff. Really enjoyed it. Thanks for having me, man.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share in your social media where you can tag us at The Successful Screenwriter.